joined by Lieutenant Colonel Eyal Dror. He's a former IDF officer and the founder of the Good Neighbour campaign, which helped to treat Syrian civilians in Israeli hospitals during the Syrian civil war. He's also the author of a book called Embracing the Enemy, which is about his experiences. It's just been translated into English. Welcome, Eyal. We're also joined from the United States tonight by Hazem Al-Gabra. He is a former senior advisor at the US Department of State. Welcome, Hazem. Good to see you as always. So, Eyal, I'll start with you because it was your organisation, wasn't it, that helped bring the wounded Druze into Israel over the weekend. It sounds like an extremely dangerous mission. Tell us about that, and can we expect more of the same?
So good evening, and I will just mention that the IDF brought the Syrian Druze wounded, not myself. I am a reserved officer, but there is plenty of officers that are doing this great job. And yes, everything that going on a border that within a hostile country is complicated. So the mission, of course, is complicated, and every time that you are opening the gate in order to evacuate it, in my time it was Sunnis. This is what has been my experience, has been written in my book. Today is the Druze, but any population that coming from an enemy country on a hostile border today, on the border we know that there is groups of ISIS, for example, and Al-Qaeda. So any movement around that is dangerous to the soldiers of the IDF that doing this evacuation, because it is not like there is a humanitarian organization like in other places in the world. The organization, let's call it, that doing this evacuation is the IDF, and yes, of course, it's not a safe mission. It's not like walking on the sea.
Hazem, I want to ask you about the Syrian perspective, but also the perspective from the United States. How are Israel's actions in Syria over the past few days seen, these actions to try and protect the Druze? Is there a risk that this actually puts the community in more danger because they're, seen as allies of the hated Zionists, as it were?
That had existed way before this operation happened and will continue to exist. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the new Syria. There are obvious extremist elements that are trying to control the narrative today. So it's an unfortunate fact, and Israel had to act. And some people understand it, some people do not. I feel one of the missing elements, and the elements that continue to be missing, is a clear policy, clear strategy, and communication between the Israeli government and the Syrian people, not the government. I think Israel needs to be a lot more overt and clear about the message, about what they're trying to accomplish, because if that a clear element is not available to the average Syrian person, they end up listening to opposing narratives that are anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic at times. The other thing, and I'm glad Eyal is here on air with us because I have a message directly to him that I delivered personally in Jerusalem to the IDF and the MFA at the same time, actually, in a meeting. The good neighbor policy is something quite historic, actually. However, not a lot of people know what it was and what happened. And I'm not talking about individual names or anything personally identifying, but I would love to see a fact sheet. Not a book, I love the book, but I think there needs to be a constantly updated fact sheet about that engagement, so anybody and a layman can look at it and see what Israel did during the Syrian civil war. It's very important.
All right, let me put that to Eyal then. I mean, has there been an attempt to reach out to the Syrian people? Because it's hard to see, the Syrian people very weary of war. They've just got rid of a hated dictator, and then they see Israel, dropping bombs on their capital city. It's hard to see how else they would interpret that other than aggression and an effort to break up their country.
So like you understand, the Middle East is complicated. The people that were working with me has been accused as collaborators when the Assad regime came back on 2018, and the people that will connect today, the IDF, and there is some connections, will be called collaborators by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham government. This is how it works, and unfortunately, the hate and those messages is much more again, unfortunately, much more powerful. What I can say that what we have done before, people knows about it on the area, people knows about it in Syria and outside Syria. Even what is going today, not much is published. There is some publication about the humanitarian aid, but not everything is published. And I say that it is important that it's not published, because when things are happening, not in the shade of the media, good things happening. So even today, people knows what is going on between Israel and the Syrian residents. I do believe and I do hope that we should do more in order to spread the light about that. And just please, one note to what Mr. Hazem said. The policy of Israel should be clear. I do know that there is like messages from Israel. There is some clear messages, and I remind that all of us, we shouldn't, because we're all focusing with the Druze issue. I think that the big point of this issue is that Israel is willing and will do anything to prevent a jihadist Islamic radicals movements around our borders.
As an existential threat, right? Hazem, I want to just bring it back to the Druze quickly, though, because the plight of the Druze is definitely being felt keenly here in Israel, not just among the Druze community here, but among ordinary Israelis as well. I mean, there are genuine fears that the Druze could end up like the Yazidis, you know, in Syria and Iraq. You know, we have seen communities genocided by these kind of Islamist groups. Is the American government aware of this risk, do you think?
And not only the Yazidis, the Kurds as well. I mean, there's history here, and that's a big part of the problem. The U.S. government is obviously aware. Now, we are working on a parallel track with the new Syrian government, obviously on issues like the foreign fighters. The U.S. is trying to engage by testing the new government's not only willingness to implement changes, but also ability to implement such changes. Now, let's be clear. If it wasn't for the Israeli intervention the past 48 hours, the deal that was established to create some security autonomy for Sweda, for the Druze area, wouldn't have happened. This is very clear to everybody. However, it's still, the situation will continue to be fragile till the new Syrian government can establish a policy and a process of inclusion or protection of minorities. We've seen, this is not only about minorities, even last night, there was a nightclub in Damascus that was attacked by HTS forces and the patrons were beaten. These individualized cases are affecting the Alawites, they're affecting the Druze, they're affecting other communities, and even patrons at a nightclub in the middle of Damascus. There is a problem. The Syrian government needs to admit that there's a problem and create a process to fix such problem.
Hazem, thank you very much. Hazem Al-Gabra and Ayal Dror. Thank you to you both.